Hello, everyone. We are really delighted to start our last panel. But last but not least, with the Professor Rupprecht from the University of Düsseldorf, right? And the chairman of ASCOLA. It's really a great honor to us, Rupprecht, to have you here and to learn more with you now. I must say that this is a hot topic in Brazil. We are in the moment of, when I mention we, the country, to work on some bills to create our own Digital Markets Act, right? I don't know if it's going to be similar to yours, to European Digital Markets Act, or if it's going to be like a mixture of DMA, DSA, AI, whatever, I don't know. What I do know is that we are kind of lost in terms of concepts, goals, and whether we should have an act. So this is our context, and very fruitful, I would say, for you to jump in to tell us what happened in the EU and how you were seeing this, and etc. Right? Vinicius, want to say something?
Thanks very much for participating, and I agree with Eduardo. People discuss a lot the DMA in Brazil, and it's going to be excellent to know the great question of enforcement from you, and it's very important, and thanks very much for being here.
And Vicente, want to say something to Professor Rupprecht?
Yes, to our chair, our president Rupprecht, it's an honor, Rupprecht, to have you here with us. Thank you for accepting this invitation of IBCI and ASCOLA Brazil. And I know that you can contribute a lot with the improvement of competition law in Brazil. Thank you so much.
All right, Rupprecht, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to Eduardo, Vinicius, Vicente. Great to see you all, and I'm very delighted and happy to be with you. It's a great honor to be the last speaker of your conference, and I hope you had a good time already. Now let me see what I can add to that. I'm speaking from Germany. As you know, Germany is part of the European Union, of course, and I want to discuss with you a bit what we did in digital regulation. I was not so sure how much you know already about this, so we will see sort of what whether I hit the level correctly, but you can of course always ask me more details, questions, or intervene when you have other issues that you wish to discuss. So I will share some slides with you so that it may possibly be easier for you to follow. And I think that we are really at a stage now to see where are we standing, what are the first lessons that we can draw from what we would call what I would call digital regulation. And when I'm speaking about digital regulation, I am of course talking about these companies. This is basically what we are concerned with in Europe. I've sorted them by age, so Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, or Alphabet and Meta, as they are nowadays called. But actually, I think it is important, maybe that's also already a first lesson, that we are discussing actually 5 companies in the world that trouble us, or that we see as where we see a certain need for regulation, and that is also quite a statement in the sense of this is really very specific to these companies. Now we have a lot of things going on in the digital realm, so there are many other companies that are acting in digital spheres. There are of course companies like Booking.com or Spotify or others that are also very important in this field. And I think it is one of the first things I want to say, that we always have to see, is this specific to one company? Is this specific to a certain group of companies? Does this apply to all companies, or where do we sort of distinguish what we are doing? Now, just as a very little recap, why are we doing this at all? This is my idea of competition as we knew it. So on day one, you go to your local bakery and buy a bread. You are the consumer, the bakery is the undertaking. And on the next day, you have a new chance, the bakeries have a new chance to win you over for selling bread. And consumers and undertakings find each other every day. So this is our normal idea of dynamic competition as it was. Now, what changed in the past, say, 20 years, maybe 10 years, is that someone squeezed into this. And this someone is the platforms. And the platforms came in and they started to organize our consumption. And that is sort of the big change in the economy, that we have a platform, that a platform starts saying, hey, I organize, for example, how you book your hotel rooms, and you don't have to deal individually with hotels anymore, but there is someone helping you with this. This is me, I'm the platform operator. And you all know that platform markets tend to tipping under certain circumstances. That is to say, after a while, we only have one platform left, the winner takes it all markets, and this platform then organizes the exchange of goods and services. Now, this is sort of our starting point where we started 10 or 15 years ago. This is not bad. This is good. This reduces transaction costs to an enormous degree, and all of us profit from the services of such platforms. The undertakings reach a much wider audience. The consumers have a much wider choice, so that's great to have. So I think we always should be aware. Now, sometimes I tend to forget that myself because I've become very critical of these platforms. But what they do in their core business is actually very, very helpful for all of us. We could not use the internet without a search engine. We would not have smartphones without operating systems, etc. But the point here is that if there is someone sitting between the consumer and the undertaking, this someone can steer or manipulate the process to a large degree. And that is particularly true if this company is also steering the flow of information in society. And this is something that I learned over the past years, that the specific danger of these companies is not just that they are sitting here at the customer interface, but that they also control what kind of information we pass from one to another. And that is, they know much more about us. They know very much about what is going on, and that enables them to abuse this power. Now, if we have power, if we have network effects, if we have strong companies, we all know that we have competition law to regulate. But I think that at least in Europe, I cannot say anything about the situation in Brazil. That's your business. But at least in Europe, we have seen the failure of competition law. We achieved far too little, far too late. And the most important case probably to illustrate that is the Google shopping case, where it took years to come up with a result. That result didn't help anyone, and the case is still pending in courts. So I think that our procedures in antitrust and competition law have grown far too complicated. They take far too long. And that is sort of the starting point why we did all this regulation. Now, what are the first lessons? I really have to say first lessons, because we are not very advanced in digital regulation now in Europe. But what are the first lessons that we've learned in Europe from digital regulation? The first thing that I want to show to you is this, what I call the regulatory puzzle. This is what we have as new rules on digital regulation in the EU. And this is far from complete. This is just sort of the laws and acts that come to my mind. The Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, DSA and DMA, the Data Act, providing access to data, the Data Governance Act, where intermediaries on data are concerned with, the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, which has been updated for the digital sphere, the General Data Protection Regulation on privacy, the Platform to Business Regulation. We have changes in competition law. We have changes in copyright law. We now have a Media Freedom Act that is about to come. We have an AI Act that is about to come. So there is a whole bunch of ideas going on, and I think this is one of the things that we have to work on in the future, that this stays manageable. I mean, these are hundreds of rules coming down to the undertakings. personally, I cannot tell you really how this all interacts, what is all in all these rules. Even me, that I'm a researcher, that I'm looking into this sphere very intensely, can concentrate on a few of these, but not on all of these. And for undertakings and companies, it has become a burden that this much regulation came down to them. And that explains a bit what my stance on regulation is these days. I am very much progressive, as we may call it, in the sense of I am in favor of regulation. I advise the governments on this, and I'm generally pro-regulation in this field. But I think we have to now know our limits. We have to see that regulation needs to be principled, that we need sort of something which is manageable for companies and for enforcers alike. This is something where I've huge doubts that this happens. And I sometimes hear calls from undertakers and politics saying, please give us 2 years now without a new regulation. And I think there is some good to that. Now I'm focusing, since this is the IBCI and you're all competition experts, I'm focusing on what is closest to competition, which is the Digital Markets Act. But just sort of to set the scene for you, we have different models of intervention coming from a competition perspective. I'm looking into the regulation perspective, which is in the middle here, where you see the EU Digital Markets Act and also the UK solution, which acts with a digital markets unit. This is now currently still under debate in the UK, but this is real regulation, as we know regulation from railways, from energy, from water supplies, etc. I think that it is worth to mention that there are two different approaches if you come from competition law. Germany, for instance, tried a antitrust law plus approach, as we would call it. They reformed competition law. They introduced a section 19A in the German Competition Act, where they identified undertakings with paramount significance for competition across markets. These are the big tech players, and they give them special competition rules and duties. But these duties and rules have to be activated in special procedures by the competition agency in Germany. And the companies can always say, but this is efficient, what we are doing. So this is close to traditional competition abuse laws, but it still leaves the efficiency defense to companies, and it has to be activated. That's why we still think it is still competition law and not yet regulation, as we will see from the DMA. The United States try a completely different approach. They take their traditional, you know that there are a lot of bills in the House, but we see also that probably American politics at present is not able to legislate anything. So they try it with the Sherman Act and other tools they have, and they try a more structural approach with Lina Khan at the head of the FTC, for instance, trying to force the companies to divest, which in my view could possibly work. Whether it works with the courts in the US is a completely different matter, but just to show it to you as another alternative to what is going on. Now, looking at the DMA, what makes the DMA a regulatory tool? The DMA has specific provisions instead of general clauses, or as we tend to say, these are rules, not standards, if you know that dichotomy of rules and standards. So it is a very clear-cut text. It gives very precise instructions to the companies what they are allowed to do and what not. We have a new filter. This new filter is no longer market power, but this filter is the role of gatekeeper and core platform services, which is largely defined by quantitative thresholds. So if you reach certain numbers of users, a certain market cap, etc., you are in the DMA. That is a newly set filter, which is different from competition. And there is no longer an individual assessment of efficiencies and benefits. So these rules apply once you have been identified as a gatekeeper or core platform service. These rules apply without individually saying, yeah, in your case, it's a bit different, as we know it from competition law. So that is really a huge difference from what we've done so far. And also, we do not want to protect consumer welfare or competition or whatever you see as the goals of competition law, but we have a differently defined regulatory aim, namely fairness and contestability. Now, this sounds close to competition. We know the term fairness, we know what contestability is, but still it has a different sort of general idea behind it than in competition law. I don't want to talk you through this slide, but I want to show it to you and sort of show you what is in there. This is my summary of the Digital Markets Act in one slide. We have a regulatory idea, fairness and contestability. We then go to the designation of the addressees of this act, so the gatekeepers, with a list of core platform services largely based on quantitative numbers. Where we have these gatekeepers, we have specific obligations in place. And that is maybe most interesting. So that's the list of examples that you see there. There are about 20 obligations that we have, including a notification to duty to notify all mergers that is already now in place, but also rules like no self-preferencing, no tying of other business services to the services you have, a certain interoperability, no price parity clauses, no anti-steering provisions, etc. So there are a couple of obligations that are there. They're much more precise than I can put them on one slide. But that is sort of the core of what they need to do. Very quickly, competition law remains applicable. Next to that, we have certain enforcement tools here, but enforcement largely rests on compliance by the companies, which is controlled by the European Commission. And we have certain new tools in order to make sure that the DMA still remains relevant. We can do market investigations for new instruments, etc., which I find is a very, very interesting feature and important feature of the DMA, because it is necessary to adapt the legislation over time. This is something that we learned in the past years, and a quick adaptation of rules is very difficult in many legal systems. So we have special tools for that in the DMA as well. Now here you see our latest. This is what the European Commission now said are the gatekeepers and the core platform services that are specifically regulated under the DMA. The gatekeeping companies are the 5 that I had mentioned before, plus one entry from China, namely ByteDance, that is the mother company of TikTok. I don't know whether that is a big thing in Brazil as well. It is for our kids at least. I'm not having a TikTok account here, but you probably heard about that one or know that. And these are the gatekeeping companies. And these gatekeeping companies operate core platform services, which can be grouped into certain groups. You see intermediation, social networks, messaging services, video sharing, search, browsers, and operating services and ads. You see that Google is pretty heavily affected here, but also others, of course. And these are really the services where we now go into with the DMA. This is where we stand. The obligations in the DMA, apart from notifying mergers, will only apply as of next year, March next year. So the companies have to have a certain time to comply now. They have a couple of months. And that is something which is very significant about the DMA as well. Namely, we have very specific time limits. Since we have seen how antitrust sort of took years to come forward with cases, we said, okay, you now get 6 months' time to comply with the obligations of the DMA, very strict time limit. The Commission is under high pressure to conduct cases, to conduct its investigations, etc. They need to check in several months, etc. So that is very new and very challenging also for the enforcement body. But this was something where the European Parliament in particular said, we are going to force you, the European Commission, as our competition watchdog, or now the DMA watchdog, we're going to force you to be very, very quick. And in a short period of time, you cannot do the same depth of investigations as in competition law. That is also very clear. So we will see in 6 months how this plays out. Let me say that there is one rule in the DMA which is important as well, namely Article 8, which says you have to prove that you comply with this. And this is now something where we are currently debating, what does that mean? What does it mean you have to prove that you comply? Do you really have to show that new users are doing new things, that business users are doing new activities on your platforms, or that they are able to do something? Do you have to really prove that something changed? Do you only have to show that you changed some algorithms or something? So very interesting to see how we define the companies have to prove what they are doing. And also Article 8 has a very strict circumvention rule. So you may not go around these obligations. This makes enforcement probably much tougher than we know it from antitrust law. Now, I want to share with you a couple of lessons, as we would call it, of what we think. The first thing I said to you earlier already, I want a principled approach. I would have wished for a more principled idea than we have it in the DMA. So maybe that's something you can do better than the EU if you follow my sort of idea. I think that first we need to be clear what is really the starting point for intervention. Why do we intervene here? And that is completely unclear. I think that we have a lot of distrust in what is going on. We have an unease with how these companies work, but what exactly is it that we want to sort of regulate? And there are a couple of ideas that are out there in public of why these companies are difficult to deal with or dangerous for our economy or our society. In competition law, we classically intervene because of dominance or at least the abuse of dominance. Now, the European Court of Justice said there is something else than dominance, namely ultra-dominance. So if you are not just dominant, but you are ultra-dominant, you may have further responsibilities. That's a concept invented by the court, which begs the question, okay, what does that now mean? What is ultra-dominance and what extra responsibilities go with that? But that's still sort of competition law. While in other fields, if we look at it from another perspective, we can probably see different things. We started with platforms, but the platform economy is no longer our main concern, that these are platforms, but we have different sort of notions of what these companies are actually doing. If we look at it, I think that one issue is that these companies provide the infrastructure, and that leads to regulation. If Google serves as the infrastructure provider for the internet society, then it is very clear, as we know it from railways, as we know it from energy, that we have to regulate this infrastructure because there's only one company offering that. We have to probably deal with that. That is sort of the infrastructure part. Nowadays, many people say the infrastructure part, one sentence on infrastructure, and then you can also look into the services they provide. And probably not everything that is now a core platform service is really a infrastructure service. So there may be differences there. Then a second concern is that these companies build ecosystems, that they keep you on your platform, drive you into their ecosystem, and others are no longer able to deal with that. That's a very good concept in my view. If you want to have this concept broken up or opened up, it is probably good to look into divestiture, into separation, into structural separation of services, rather than regulate or act with competition law. Now, then there is the term of gatekeeper. Gatekeeper means I open the gates, you have to go through this gate, and then I connect you with others. In my view, that is more a thing for interoperability solutions. And then there is also the idea that these companies have vast control over our data, which is not so much a competition concern, but more a privacy concern, but which also plays into this. And there we have information consent or other things where we probably have to deal with. I think that this issue of data control is particularly relevant also for artificial intelligence, because they need data to feed their AI. So my first lesson that I draw is we should be clearer on what is our issue and then find the targeted measure for this concern that we have. The second issue plays on data. Digital means data. That is the definition of digital. But data is a very double-sided issue. And that is also something where I think that our debate in Europe went a bit wrong. Data is in Europe often seen as a constitutional issue. It's a matter of privacy. You want to have privacy. You want to be the owner of your data. You want to say for yourself what you want to do with your data. That's fine. That's something that we address with the GDPR, with privacy rules. That's where we also come in with consumer protection, media democracy issues, content moderation, etc. But data also has an important economic value. It is very important for competition. Companies need to have access to data, and that can be personal data if they want to compete. And these two things are really at odds. And if you want innovation, data access and cybersecurity, you should view data from much more economic perspective. And I think that this perspective is lacking a bit in the European debate because we are so strong on the constitutional issue here, on the privacy issue, that we fall into difficulties in enabling others to use data, be it for artificial intelligence or for competing with the gatekeepers. I jumped this one. I think that it is important to see that data is another resource in our economy, and we need to look at it from a competitive dimension, but we also need to see that it has, of course, a huge privacy and information dimension, and that is something where we have not yet really found a good balance of this. I think that empowering consumer choice or citizen choice could be a way out of this, but that would entail that users get the choice, get the economic idea of data, saying, okay, you can consent to make others use these data. Now, I said already that I want to aim for a principled approach. What do I mean with this? I think we have no clear picture yet, and I hope Brazil is going further in this debate than we would, what we really want to achieve. As a competition guy, I'm coming from the bottom of this page. I want to make markets work. That's my main concern. I want that companies have fair chances in competition. That is why I want to open up what the gatekeepers have erected as their dominion. Now, correct market failures, enhance welfare, that is the classic competition know-how. So we as competition people have to feed in this economic know-how. But in society, in political debate, we also have other values, and that's of course very fair. People are concerned with data, they're concerned with democracy, with the role of media, etc. They come from constitutional policy and philosophy principles. And I think that it is very difficult to combine these two, but we have to combine these two if we want a good principled approach to digital regulation. I do not see that in the DMA, to be clear on that. The DMA has a mixed sort of idea of what it wants to achieve. If you want some reading on this, the German Federal Supreme Court, the Bundesgerichtshof, has decided in the Meta case of the Bundeskartellamt, and I think that they have really struck a good note on combining market concerns with constitutional concerns, in that they say we have to look at how markets work and at the same time look what this means in constitutional terms. That is an inspiring reading. I'm not 100% sure that there is an English translation now. I would have to look that up, or even a Portuguese one. But it is a good sort of interesting reading in this regard. So I think that we have to really make sure, what do we want to achieve in this new style of economy that we have? I think we can stick with a lot of the principles that we have developed over decades. But then we have to look how we make that how we tie that together with political concerns, how we make that coherent, how we make the regulatory puzzle workable. And that is a big chance for all those who now enter into this process, that you maybe step back a second and say, okay, I'm going to look at this from a principled approach so that companies know what they have to do, and so that our political and market concerns are solved at the same time. Now, another concern of mine is, do not fall into the traps of big tech. I said already that I'm not a big tech fan. I have to confess that I counseled for Google some 10 years or so ago. That is now all sort of time limited, but ever since I helped them then on a smaller competition or issue back then they were still a very sympathetic company, and they are now, and their people are great and everything, but they also know how to play power politics, and that's sort of something that I want to make you aware of. The first thing is, lobbying of big tech is huge, including hidden firms. So we have seen, I'm personally am proud that the European institutions got the DMA through and ignored how strongly they were lobbied. This was a good sign for politics, in my view, in the sense that that political institutions were still able to push something through against an enormous wave of lobbying. And lobbying also concerns us as researchers, right? And in the sense of, we do this counseling, we get money from them, etc. I think that's okay. I'm not generally against money from big tech. I'm not generally against money anyway. But it's probably important to to stick to the ASCOLA ethics code to declare when you are biased, right? ASCOLA has a fantastic code on this, where we say you have to declare who's your sponsor so that this becomes clear. Now, what you see here, just sort of for illustration, is who gave money to what European think tank. These on the left side, you see the European think tanks, which are very important in the Brussels political sphere where we do the European politics. And you see that Google sponsors all of them but one, right? So they all get money from Google. The most important 12 or so think tanks in Brussels, and same goes for Facebook and Microsoft, and then the other companies to a lesser degree. But if you see papers from them, always be aware, okay, this is actually a think tank which has been sponsored by these companies. This does not necessarily make their argument wrong, but I think it's important to know, and that should be clear for your jurisdiction as well. Some big tech firms also regularly threaten to leave the country, but they never do. We saw that in Australia for the first time, when Australia introduced a policy that Meta and others have to pay for newspaper content that they publish. Meta said, okay, we're going to leave Australia then. They returned after 3 days. So don't worry, don't sort of, Brazil is a strong and large economy. I think they are able to design their business model around what is going on, right? So, so this threat, in my perception, is not too strong. Maybe it's a bit different with smaller jurisdictions, but generally I think that is true. And finally, something that one should always keep in mind, they always tend to say, or big tech always says, we are innovative, and they are innovative. That's absolutely true, right? And we want this innovation, but regulation is not opposed to innovation. It steers innovation into different fields maybe, but is not necessarily opposed to regulation, to innovation. What we see as important in Europe these days is that we keep markets open so that other companies can innovate. And that is my big concern with artificial intelligence, actually, that artificial intelligence now is already, again, with these big tech players, they are going to use it for their power play. And it is difficult for other companies to come into that field. So don't let yourself, don't be led into this trap that once you put a rule out there, you kill innovation. You will not. You will just have a better or other innovation. And of course, you have to be aware of these facts, but it's not, this argument is far too cheap. Now, finally, that is something that Eduardo mentioned in the beginning. I'm coming to this now. Enforcement matters. And that is something that my friend Philip Marston, who many of you will know as the big rap star of competition law, and me, what we said very early on, enforcement matters. And when we look back to antitrust, I think we made a couple of core mistakes. We were, some of these mistakes were substantive. We looked into small markets that we defined very neatly instead of seeing the overall picture. We had little understanding for the scaling strategies of big tech, and we had probably some misunderstandings on the use of economics, but we were also very cautious and very shy on enforcement. And we saw that in merger control, where we let things like Facebook, WhatsApp pass without saying anything. We were overburdening procedures with economic tests. We had huge difficulties in getting this through. So enforcement of competition law failed us. I think that was really an enforcement issue. And that is why it is so important to look into the issue. How do you get these big tech companies to enforce your rules? And that is very important in my view. As I said earlier, the DMA takes a strategy of asking for compliance. It takes a strategy of very short time limits. It also moves to rules instead of standards, so that it is clear-cut what has to be done, relatively clear-cut. So the companies need to comply with that. That is sort of something where I would say these are key features that we should look at. We need to speed up procedures. We need to keep rules flexible to a certain degree, in the sense of we need to be able to adapt. I think it would be great to have technology for compliance. So send your algorithms, send your enforcement bots into the fields. Make sure that these companies comply with fines and other mechanisms. Do not try to be overly ambitious. That's also something that I find is important for enforcement. If you want to cure the world with one case, you probably will not succeed. But if you take a dedicated matter and say, okay, now we want to stop Amazon Marketplace from self-preferring Amazon products, then go for this and try to solve this problem, but don't try to solve everything else around that as well. Make sure that the courts are on board. I think that is something very important also for Europe, where we will see how the cases that will come up play out with the courts. The courts often take a long time. They sometimes, are there any judges in the audience? I'm not sure. The judges sometimes lag behind a bit in their economic and grasp of topics. So they're not where we are at present. That's something that you see in the United States as well. So make sure that there is a sort of idea in society that something needs to be done. And then you have to decide what is the role of public and private enforcement. The European Commission primarily relies on public enforcement by the Commission itself, but they were forced to open up the DMA a bit for private enforcement. Me personally, I'm a big fan of private enforcement. I think it is a very interesting component when you have business users, so smaller companies that use these platforms that can go to court, sue for an injunction, sue for damages. That will be pushy if you one day do not have the resources at your authority, if you one day you do not have the right persons at the helm of the authority that push that agenda. So that can change it over time as well. So being a freedom advocate, I love private enforcement and love the competition of different courts and bodies. And then you, of course, always have a structure, at least in Europe, with the European Court of Justice at the top of it that keeps this together, this system. Now, the final thing is, you have a big advantage in that others tried it before, and you can see what works internationally and what others make. And this is exactly what IBCI does today, what we do at ASCOLA, of course. And that is, I think, also very important. I've just come back from the International Competition Networks meeting in Brazil, and their enforcers meet. They are some non-governmental advisors like me as well who are there, but enforcers basically meet and share their experiences. I think this is something that is really important, that is really incredibly helpful if you can see this works. And what you also learn there is if something works somewhere and you get companies to adhere to that, be it Europe, be it Japan, be it Korea, be it Brazil, you can also ask them to do that in your country because they're already used to that. They have already aligned with that somehow. And I think this is a big chance for countries that start now, that they do not come up with 1,000 new requirements, but that they say, okay, let's take talk. We have the DMA, there are the obligations in Articles 5 and 6. We want this to happen in Brazil as well, if you agree. And then it will be much easier for, say, Amazon or Google to do the same thing in Brazil as they are doing in Europe anyway already. So my final call is one for international cooperation. You are doing that, we are doing this here, so that's great. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
Wow, congratulations, Rupprecht. I couldn't expect less. It was very nice. I learned, I mean, very clear this lesson about the DMA. And would you share this content with us for us to put it in our website? Very, very instructive. Thank you very much. And well, I will say some words and then I will pass the word to Vinicius and Vicente, because I'm sure they have something to say. I like the idea. I've read already the DMA for sure, but now it's more clear the strategy and what was behind, right? But I believe a lot in approaching and looking at the goals or thinking about the problems. And I must say, to me, we have similar problems, if not the same, in terms of having these few groups in the country dominating the ecosystem realm, right? So we have the same problem. Why not having the same clear-cut regulation? You would make easier for the regulators and the incumbents to apply, to comply with. I'm not sure if we will have the same lucky result in terms of not succumbing the lobby, right? I'm not so sure, but let's see. But I'm sure there's a lot of people here that would be willing to learn with the European experience, including judges. This is a good news, if I may share. Judges here, I mean, federal and state judges, they are keen to learn, and they are keen to be accountable to decide this type of thing, right? So I've been noticing more and more the judges being engaged in discussions like, how can I apply a law like civil rights in the digital platform? How can I protect consumer? How can I grant our also constitutional data right or privacy right? So this pretty much is what I would add to your brilliant panel, Rupprecht and Vinicius, and then Vicente, please. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, Robert. It was a very instructive and a brilliant presentation. I also learned a lot. And one of the things you mentioned, I think it's interesting, is there is this idea that data constitutional right that we have in Brazil also, as Eduardo said, is at odds with the economic value of data. If you think about the two values of the DMA, contestability and fairness, can you translate this to like a paradox? If you focus too much on fairness and try to regulate a lot of data with all the other different acts you mentioned in your presentation, you're gonna making contestability harder because you have to do a lot of procedures to get access to data. And maybe fairness is better to deal with regulation and contestability with competition law. I don't know what you think about
it. Thank you, Rupprecht. Amazing presentation, very clear. The DMA was based in the experience of the European Union, the DG Comp, acting especially in abuse of dominance cases. Brazil, we have a few experience our competition authority, not as the same of DG Comp in this specific sector. And it's underway, the Bill of Law in Brazil that we can call the Brazilian DMA. In which way do you believe the DMA can contribute for the Brazilian DMA? Once you are based in the experience of the European Union, but you have to apply to our reality. I think this is one point. And the other one, a question, not a question, but a reflection, and maybe we could hear you. It's you pointed the 5 or 6 gatekeepers according to the DMA. 5 big techs from the US, one from China. The ByteDance, that's TikTok, that we have also in Brazil. Maybe if we apply the DMA in Brazil, we'd have also Alibaba and Tencent in Brazil, maybe as gatekeepers from China. Do you think that the DMA will restrict competition and innovation, as the big tech say, or it will be a way to open the floor for finally European big tech appear in this scenario? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. That's really much appreciated. And I think, Vicente, if I may start with what you said, you said it's important to adapt it to our economy and our world, our problems. I think that is really important, that you really, I think the world grew together very strongly. We make the same experiences, but of course, every country, every continent has its own issues and topics and ideas and philosophy, etc. I think this is really important that you that we keep that in mind, and that is where I cannot say anything on Brazil in the sense of what exactly are the specific issues there. And mentioning China in that regard is, of course, also one of the interesting questions. So we are pretty sure in Europe that we get the US big tech firms to comply in the sense of they will interact with the commission and that will work smoothly. But we are not so sure whether that works in the same way with Chinese companies. We lack some experience in regulating Chinese companies that come to Europe, right? And we have seen in merger cases with Chinese companies that it is difficult to get all information and you cannot enforce it, etc. And it's not that amicable relationship in Europe that we have with with the USA. So that will be an interesting feature as well. And if Alibaba and Tencent are more important, so further Asian companies in Brazil, that will probably also be an issue. Now, Vicente, you asked me, will it succeed in open up the markets? I think that the DMA will provide more chances for smaller enterprises. So for say the people that sell stuff on Amazon, or the people that advertise on Google or so, I'm not so sure that we will see the rise of alternative gatekeepers. So in the sense of there will be a new Google or a new Amazon or so from Europe, I don't see that. And I mean, it would be great if we had European gatekeepers that fall under the DMA. We would be very proud to have that, but I don't see that for now. The European companies are not so good at working with data, software, etc. I mean, there are some like Booking and Spotify once was a Swedish company. They now are registered in the United States as well. But so there are some sort of lurking there. But if you want to imply that it was easier for Europe to do this because there was no European company involved, I fully agree. So I'm sure that this also has some kind of, I wouldn't say protectionist notion to it, but it would have probably been much more difficult if a big European company had been in it at the beginning. But that may come. So Booking is probably the prime candidate to join the DMA gatekeepers. Right. So I think that the key effort that the DMA does is to help business users that depend on these companies. I think that is where we will see changes that will also work in practice. I go back now to Vinicius. Vinicius, thank you also for your question. You asked on the data being at odds with the competition principles, and I fully agree. This is really a big thing. In Europe, we have a new rule called the Data Act, which deals with access to data that has to be given to third parties. This is another of my pet projects, so I'm very thankful for asking that question. The Data Act essentially says, if a product, a smart product, say your washing machine or something, generates data by use, or your car, that's a typical example as well. So the car collects data all the time, etc. Then there has to be a mechanism so that third parties can access these data, for instance, for repairing, for maintenance, etc. The Data Act is, in my view, incredibly important for smaller businesses and middle-sized businesses who still want to access these fields. Because otherwise, the danger is that the big industrial companies, say the car manufacturers or even Google and others, take the data that are generated by smart devices and they work with it and they basically exclude everyone. Because if you want to do anything with the washing machine that someone bought or the car, you need access to the data these days. If you want to repair that car, you need to know what happened. You need to get access to the black box, right? And if you don't get that access, you're out. And that means you first have to buy a license from the car operator, from someone to get access to these data. And that is something that the Data Act tries to remedy. So I think it's a very, very important tool. But one, it is very complicated in how it is done. I think it is not very user-friendly. And two, it doesn't solve the personal data issue very well. So it still has the privacy notion in there. It has some solutions to that, but it's not the big sort of breakthrough for access to data. So best I can say to your comment is we have a lot of rules now on data portability, on data access. That is in the data portability rules are also in the DMA. Some data portability rules, that's very good, but it all depends on consumer consent, on user consent, and you have to get the user to agreeing that your personal data is taken elsewhere. And I think that even many business data are nowadays personal data in the sense that you cannot work with them without knowing who has been around, etc. So this remains a key problem. If Brazil comes up with a great solution, I'm happy to implement it at once in Europe. Finally, Eduardo, great that you point to the judges and the cooperation with judges. I think this is really vital that this newish or newer field becomes a big topic there. And as you also say, you want to think in problems and in goals of regulation. This is, in my view, this is what I really share. What are the real problems and what are the goals that we want to achieve? And I think that the idea of contestability, that you keep markets open, that you keep them open for small and medium-sized enterprises or for startups that come up with new ideas, with good ideas, with innovative ideas. I think this is really something that we should keep as the clear message. Maybe not so much reduce the power of the big gatekeepers, they are there, but to have the new technology coming one day that helps to topple these gatekeepers because there is something new and this technology is not at once bought by the gatekeepers. I think that is really what we need to aim for.
Perfect. So my friends, any other comment or question? So I'm quite happy about this end of this seminars conference. Really happy.
I will keep my question to Rupprecht for the next ASCOLA conference in Germany next year.
That's great that you point to that, Vicente. I cannot. You're a good marketing man. So next ASCOLA conference 2024 in Würzburg, which is a lovely city in Bavaria. It's 1 hour from the Frankfurt International Airport, so it's good to reach from Sao Paulo, Rio, wherever Brasilia, wherever you are, flying to Frankfurt, and it's definitely worth it. And practice your musical skills because the local organizer, who is Florian Wien, wants to do the ASCOLA concert for the first time. He wants everyone to play instruments and make music, and we love samba and Brazilian style music here, so we count on you.
All right. Good to know. I will play. I will try.
But so, first, you have to understand how and to learn how to pronounce the name of the city. It's so difficult.
Yeah. Well, let me just to fix an error that I should have said in the beginning. This panel should count on the presence of Juliana as well, Rupprecht, Professor Juliana, and she tried to be here, but she's now in a trial session at the tribunal. That's why she's not here. But she was in the backstage from the beginning until now. And I'm sorry, Juliana, don't say in the beginning of the panel, but this is a registration, a formal registration, but she's present, her presence now, right?
Please give her my best regards. I am sure that what she's doing at the trial now is much more important than listening to me. So she did set the right.
All right. Well, Rupprecht, again, thank you very much for your kindness of being with us, your generosity. Thank you, Vicente. Thank you, Vinicius. Actually, this conference, you were looking at the 3 organizers of this conference, right? So, not more than less, we 3 built this, and Juliana, that she could not be here. All right. So thank you, Vicente. Thank you, Vinicius. Congratulations for your work. Great work indeed. Thank you again, Rupprecht. And thank you all for being here with us at the 6th International Conference Competition and Innovation. I hope to see you next year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.